Mark, hi, how are you?
Hiya, Pete.
Look, before we start this, I've got to declare an interest. I've known you for 10, 12 years. So this isn't really a form of an interview. It's just to have a chat about quantum thinking. Now, I was lucky enough, and I do mean lucky enough, to actually do a one-day course with you. And indeed, my daughter, Rachel, who you remember, she's working at the Home Office at the moment. She's getting into forensic psychology. She came with me and found the whole thing fascinating. So I thought it'd be just a good idea to have a 5 or 10 minute informal chat just between us, just to get some ideas how quantum thinking can actually change people's lives. So, with that in mind and having declared an interest, I've known you for 10, 12 years, and I know you, to be fair, square, yeah? I know you to have your feet firmly on the ground, and you're not one that's into sort of touchy-feely new age kind of remedies. Now, when I came to your one day seminar and I read the notes on it, I actually found it very, very difficult to believe that some of the problems that we have as individuals could be changed and changed dramatically very, very quickly. But it does work. But just tell me, what led you to actually developing quantum thinking technique?
What led me to developing the quantum thinking technique? Well, I think it's more of a way of living as opposed to a technique, if I'm being honest with you, because it takes practice. But what led me to it was probably frustration and anger. You know, what I've learned through my life, I mean, you've known me for 10 years, you know my background.
Yeah.
I was probably, in the early days when you first met me, slightly more aggressive than I am now.
Good Lord, not you.
No, not me at all, no. But that was down to the conditioning of my past.
I never found you aggressive. I always found you very, very sort of welcoming and understanding person. So do you think, you were saying about your past and what have you, and I guess we're all shaped by our past and past events and what, you know. So without getting into specifics, there was obviously something that along the line that made you realise that, you know, you really had to find a solution perhaps to some of the obstacles of life. Yeah,
I mean, I've always been... See, anger for me has been a great motivator. When things annoy me, if I see an injustice or if I see a wrong being done, that makes me angry. And anger for me is a great motivator. It makes me do stuff. I'm not one to sit and dwell on stuff. I'll go and do something with it. And for example, when we started NFPS, or the National Federation for Personal Safety, the main reason for doing it was because people said we couldn't. So we thought, well, that's a good enough reason to go and do it, just to prove we can. And it's become, as you know, very successful.
Oh, it's a highly successful organisation, very well respected, if I might say.
Thank you very much. And obviously, we've always been interested, if you like, in going that extra mile for people.
Sure.
So we found over the years that it's nicer to help people get on their way, because by helping them, it helps us. And to do that, we have to be one step ahead of the game. And you're always consistently looking at new technologies and new thinking. And I suppose that, combined with the stuff I was doing when I was previously a prison officer and a hostage negotiator, got me very interested in human behaviour.
Well, I guess with being a hostage negotiator and prison officer, I mean, there must have been a high level of psychology involved in that. Or was it one of these things that you had been taught it by the numbers and you actually stripped it down and found the parts that worked for you and the parts that people responded to, as opposed to doing it in a textbook manner?
Yeah, I mean, I always remember, I mean, I wasn't a young prison officer. I mean, I'd spent 12 years in the forces, and I'd gone through the ranks, and I'd spent 8.5 years of that being in the Royal Navy, but working with the Marines. So I was fairly well disciplined, and I'd done every leadership and management course the Navy had to offer, really, and ended up as a lieutenant. So when I joined the prison service, I wasn't green behind the ears. And I remember going to the prison service college, and I was very impressed with the structure to the training,
sure,
the way it was run. It was all very, very good. But then when you went to your first prison and you were working as a prison officer, it was quite apparent that a lot of the stuff that you learned, apart from the process stuff, wasn't being used. And I can remember one very negative and cynical officer saying to me, "Well, did you enjoy training?" I said, "Absolutely. I thought it was first class." He said, "Well, just forget it all, because it doesn't work here. You'll be like me within 5 years." So I decided within 5 years I wouldn't be like him, because I wouldn't be there. So the prison service for me was a means to an end. I wasn't intending it to be a career.
It wasn't a career thing.
No, not at all.
So, sorry, I'm just curious. I mean, I've been to a number of your seminars, not to do with quantum thinking, because it's the seminar itself is relatively new. I've only been to one. But I've seen you work over the years, and I know the depth of research that you do on whatever topic you take on board, particularly before you put it in front of an audience. So just give me the building blocks, an outline of where you came from, what you were doing to get you to quantum thinking. Was there a kind of a magic moment, a light bulb moment where you thought, hang on a second, if I just pull all this information together and package it where people can understand it, then there would be a real benefit to it?
Not really, no. There was a process, but it wasn't at the initial stages planned. I was actually at Prison Service Training College. A colleague of mine who was there gave me a set of audio tapes, which was one of Tony Robbins' course on Unlimited Power, I think it was. And I listened to them, and they were a bit happy-clappy, a bit evangelical, and a bit American, and I thought, I don't like that side of it. But the information was good. Mm-hmm. I found the information fascinating, and it was stuff I'd never heard before. And all through my schooling, all through my military training, all through the stuff I'd learned about management and leadership, no one ever spoke about this positive aspect of behaviour and this positive way of thinking. And that's what fascinated me. And what was more interesting was the results that he seemed to be getting from people who were doing his courses. So I put up with the evangelical happy-clappy stuff and listened to the whole series. And that led me off to sort of buy other stuff. And what's interesting is over the years, I've actually become quite an avid reader.
Yeah.
And quite an avid listener of audio tapes. I mean, currently I'll read easily 3 or 4 books a month. But what's in terms of, how did one thing lead to another, there was no great plan at the beginning. One thing that did happen, which was a defining moment, if you like, was I'd bought a business at one stage, and I ended up £80,000 in the red.
Wow.
So, it was crunch time.
Yeah, serious.
Serious time. You're looking at losing your house. And
because you're a family man, aren't you, as well?
Absolutely, yeah. Family, I still have a wife and 2 children. And I suppose being ex-service and being brought up with that, male mentality, if you like, if that's the correct way of putting it, about to lose everything makes you feel less like a man in the way I was being conditioned to think.
Yeah, I can understand.
And I can remember thinking about this problem and trying to find a solution to, how do I stop the house being repossessed?
Sure.
Which really then made me draw on everything that I'd learnt up to that point and thinking, well, if this works, it's a solution to my problems. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't, I've lost nothing.
So at that point, had you come to the conclusion, and I mean no disrespect by this, but I'm genuinely curious. So you had come to the conclusion that in actual fact it wasn't the outside world conspiring against you. It was perhaps your own mindset or something that you hadn't grasped. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, that was the hard one because I could say it was the bank.
Sure.
Were being unreasonable in wanting to close the accounts. I could say that it was, the business wasn't working because people weren't working hard enough. But the real hard pill to swallow, if you're going to make this change,
to be honest with yourself,
is you've got to look yourself square in the mirror and say, well,
absolutely.
Everything that's happening to me is as a result of what I'm doing or I've done. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the whole process of the stuff we're talking about in terms of the quantum thinking side of things, and as I've said before, this is not new.
No.
Yeah, this goes back thousands of years. What they're saying is we create our reality. In other words, the world we experience on a day-to-day basis by the way we think. So in other words, everything that we're experiencing that is happening, that is coming into our lives, is because we are bringing it in. We are attracting it into our lives by the thoughts that we hold and the thoughts that we actually transmit through our thinking. So the real hard pill to swallow when you're just about to have your house taken away is it's your fault. But it's also a very liberating thought, because if you can accept that it's your thoughts that have put you in that situation, then the solution is that your thoughts can get you out of it.
Okay, can I just ask you a question on that point? It's something that I can actually relate to. I understand where you're coming from on it. Now, I know it's easier for any human being to say it's somebody else's fault, and we've all been down there, and I agree with you. In actual fact, once you begin to take responsibility for what you've done in the past, It is a very liberating thing. But that's not to say that people who have maybe made an error of judgment, made mistakes. I mean, I don't want to embarrass you. You're a highly intelligent man. Mistakes were made. Now, how can actually changing your thinking reprogram the brain? Just explain to the people that are listening, how can that actually change your life? Because this is the nub of it. Because presumably this can be applied to relationships, it can be applied to business. I mean, the impact of this is potentially huge.
Yeah, the impact is potentially huge, but the impact is happening anyway. I mean, this isn't something that we don't know about. It's happening all the time. So whether you know about it or whether you don't know about it, or whether you know whether you're doing it or whether you don't know whether you're doing it, it doesn't matter. You're doing it anyway.
Yeah, good point.
So you might as well be in the driver's seat as opposed to being a passenger
as
on the
opposed to
bus.
a negative thing.
Well, absolutely. So coming back to this point is you've got to take responsibility for what you're doing, and like you say, people will make errors along the way.
Sure,
and it's the way that you view the error.
Yeah,
in fact, I don't use the word error anymore. I used to, because it has a negative connotation to it.
Yes.
I mean, what you do is you get an output, you get a result. If that result isn't what you want, then you change what you're doing to get a better result. Yeah, and if you view stuff from a positive aspect on the basis that you can learn from it, then you'd always move forward. Mm-hmm. If you view that same situation as something that's a hindrance or a drawback, and therefore, if you like, you've been taught a lesson, then the connotation of that is that it's a bad thing.
So in other words, what you're saying is, if I understand you correctly, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's programmed in the mind, and it rattles about in there, it reinforces itself, and it actually stops you taking necessary action in a similar situation.
Yeah, well, this is a very interesting point, because the hub of it is, or the crux of it is that everything we experience is self-fulfilling. Mm. Yeah. You think in a certain way, your thoughts become polarized in a certain way, and once they become the dominant thoughts in your mind, and you're thinking about them more than other things, then those are the thoughts that are going to draw to you those things which are going to, if you like, self-justify your thinking. So if you think, for example, that you're never going to make money, you have talk about money because it's a good measurable quality.
Yeah.
If you think, for example, you're never going to make money because you've grown up with beliefs and values that have been imposed on you, let's say that, money doesn't grow on trees, or money's the root of all evil, or, good people don't have money and only bad people have money, then those values and beliefs can become quite deeply ingrained. And what happens is you get a neurological association with money being a bad thing. So if money's a bad thing, and you have a poverty mindset that you're not going to get money because you're not worthy of having money, then you'll find reasons not to make money. And that's the reason I lost all the money on my business.
Really?
Absolutely, yeah. I didn't grow up in a wealthy family.
So there was something, whether you were aware of it or not, that you actually weren't comfortable about having a degree of wealth.
No, I had a six-figure income. I was consistently, going back in the 80s. And you've got to look at this. I mean, I joined the Navy not to earn money. I joined the Navy for a career, for a way of life, which I loved. And when I left, I was actually £4,000 in debt. We actually had to cut the end off the bed to get it into the bedsit. It was quite an interesting concept. But I became very successful in a relatively short period of time. In 18 months, I was doing 1/3 of a company's turnover as a salesman. Wow. Selling computers I couldn't even work. That was the interesting bit. And earning over a six-figure income every year. I consistently had £30,000 dropping into my current account every month. So I had all this money, and I had smart suits, and I had smart cars, and I bought a big house. But there was not consciously, but unconsciously, as I look back at it and analyse it now, what I've learned, an element of uncomfortability with it. So in other words, I didn't deserve to have it.
You see, that whole thought to me is just incredible, and I expect people listening to this will actually find it almost beyond belief. But of course, the quantum thinking, because I know on the seminars you go into all the science behind it, because you can actually back up what you're telling people. I know there's nothing been pulled out there, and there's not an airy-fairy idea. But really, once people come into the quantum thinking, indeed if they read your new book, whether they read your book or whether they come to one of your seminars, my guess is that people will find, they'll actually realise some of the patterns that you're talking about, they'll actually realise that actually these patterns apply to them. Is that like the first step in in changing your whole outlook in life?
I think the first part in changing your outlook in life is to become aware of what you're doing. And you're absolutely right. We are habit-producing animals, and we produce patterns of behaviour. And we do that to free up our conscious mind. And the purpose of doing that is to allow your conscious mind to be creative. I mean, I believe we were put on this planet to be creative, not to do process. You know, the large part of our brain is the creative part. So we weren't designed to do process. And when we're stuck in doing process, doing the same thing every day, that's what creates a lot of disharmony and unhappiness in people's lives, because they're not designed for that. So when you start identifying these patterns and these imprintings, what you've got to do then is break them. You just got to find a counterexample to break the patterns.
Now, you see, this is what I found so fascinating about the whole day, that these patterns could be... I mean, you explained to us how quickly these patterns could actually be changed. Yeah. Now, I've said this to you in private, and I'll say it actually on air. Much as I respect and admire you, and I do, and I trust you, I found that absolutely an incredible thing for anyone to say. It was only a few days later, when in actual fact I started to apply what you told me, that I realised it was totally and utterly true. You know, do you think this is a stumbling block? You know, when you explain to people initially, you know, look, this is the way the mind works, and this is how quickly you can reprogram it. I can understand people being cynical or sceptical about it. Does that then become a barrier to them to actually take on board the quantum thinking techniques, or is it just being exposed to the idea actually start to bring about changes in them?
Well, we're finding, and we've trained now a lot of people with this, and the vast majority of people are taking it on board because they understand it.
Aye. So
so it's not deep science. No. You know, it's based on deep science, but it's not. You know, it's not rocket science in terms of having to learn it. And the vast majority of people are liberated by it. But you will have some people that will find it a stumbling block. And they're not bad people. It just everything I'm saying will cut across everything that they believe up to that point. Mm-hmm. But it then comes back to this question of belief.
Aye.
Because it's not whether a belief is true or not, it's whether or not you believe it. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom thing. Like therapy, for example. When Freud first developed, you know, non-directive therapy at the turn of the century, the whole aspect of therapy was focusing on a person's problem so they could understand their problem. So by understanding their problem, they could better manage their problem. Well, the problem with that is the problem gets bigger because you're talking about
sure,
the problem.
Because you go over it time and time again.
Yeah, and you identify with your problem because if you're thinking about your problem, more things will come into your life that will self-justify.
And so on.
You've got a problem.
And so it goes on.
Yeah, so it's like cutting a groove. You know, every time you think about it, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper.
Well, it's the old thing my mother used to say to me, you know, oh, you get stuck in a rut. I mean, it kind of, that's really exactly that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
And this is the whole process. And because of, you know, eminent people like Freud said that change would take a long time. People who perceive themselves as being not as eminent as Freud will say, well, he knows what he's talking about. Change takes a long time. Mm-hmm. So you can go and lie on a therapist's couch for 5 or 8 years. That was considered reasonable. At the end of it, you come away from there knowing what your problem was and have a lot of information about why you've got a problem. But you'd only be able to manage it, not be free of it.
Now, listen, I've heard you talk about that. I'm just going to pick up on that point for me. Yeah, Freud, highly respected man. And people who do respect him say, hang on a second, if this is what Freud's saying, this must be the case. This is the way it must be tackled. But you tell a very interesting story about Roger Bannister. When he first did the 4... Just tell me the story again.
Well, prior to Roger Bannister running the 4-minute mile, everyone thought that the 4-minute mile was unobtainable. It couldn't be done. Human beings could not run that fast. And all the great thinkers at the time, all the great academics said that if you ran a mile in under 4 minutes, certain things would happen to the human body. That, you know, it would be damaged irreparably to the extent that some people even believe that our internal organs would self-combust and would blow up. Now, that's quite devastating. So you can imagine if you're an athlete and you want to break the 4-minute mile, you might do it, but you might explode in the process. So there's enough motivation not to do it because you're not going to be around to collect the medal. So up to that point in 1954, no one had ever run a 4-minute mile. Now, when Bannister did it, within 1 year of him doing it, 300 people broke the 4-minute mile because he proved that you don't self-combust. You know, your body isn't damaged. So it proved the thinkers wrong. Oh. But you go through history of the world, we used to have the Flat Earth Society. You know, in some parts of the world it still exists, you know, in certain thinking. And, the world was flat, and if you went over the edge, you'd fall off. And these, the people at that time had to push the limits. They had to take risks. But they believed, that wasn't so. We believed that the world was the centre of the universe. We now know that's not true, But up to that point, it was believed to be so. It. So if you were seen as being contrary to that belief, or you challenged those beliefs, lots of bad things could happen to you in terms of, people saying, no, that person there said that it's right, they're an eminent person. Who are you to say they're wrong?
Sure, you take it at face value.
Yeah, we'll take you down to the dungeon and chain you upside down for a few years, until you change your thinking that consists with the status quo. And, we as a society have become complacent, and we need to conform with social rules. So the people that make the rules require conformity. Yeah. But that takes away a degree of creativity, because it's easier to be part of the crowd.
Absolutely, and be an individual. Yeah.
But, I always go back to something that I heard Nelson Mandela apparently say when he was released from Robben Island after all his years of imprisonment. He was apparently asked by a reporter, what's it like to be free? You've been imprisoned all this time.
Yes.
What's it like to finally be free?
Yes.
And he said, I've always been free. He said, they took away my liberty, not my freedom. Mm. And that's quite a profound thing to say, because, liberty is just a condition of the environment, but freedom is a condition of the mind. And as long as you're free to think and be creative, then you've got true freedom. Viktor Frankl, he was imprisoned in 3 concentration camps in World War II. They took away everything, his clothes, everything. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he actually says, he's a very eminent guy. The one thing they couldn't take was my ability to just choose how I would die. Mm-hmm. If faced with death, this is how I would face it. Yeah. Down to the last thing there, he had choice. And if you look at all the great thinkers, Edison, it's in the story of the light bulb. He had 10,000 attempts to produce a light bulb. Mm-hmm. And as the story goes, he was at dinner one evening and someone said to him, look, you've had 7,000 attempts. Why didn't you give up? You obviously can't make a light bulb. And he just said, no, I've just found 7,000 ways not to produce one. And if it wasn't for him, we'd all be living with candles still, So it's people who
sure.
choose not to conform, but not to conform for the right reasons. We need them.
Aye. So tell me something. As I say, I've actually been in your quantum thinking day, and I make no bones about it. I find it absolutely fascinating. Give us a couple of examples of the most powerful impact you've seen with individuals that quantum thinking has actually had.
Well, it's been quite a few.
Sure.
Yeah, we've actually had, when we first started running the course, we had a lady come on one of the first courses who sat there very quietly. And the thing about it, and you've seen the course, you can inadvertently touch a nerve sometimes with people.
Indeed, yes.
And unbeknown to me that this particular woman there had been suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder for some time. Post the course, she left there, went back to her place of work and decided that she would no longer think about OCD. Mm. She would think about the fact that she was normal and free of it. And I received an email from her the following week saying that she no longer has OCD.
Wow.
And this is a phenomenal thing.
Good Lord. That's incredible.
Well, but what you focus on, you get more of. So if your dominant thoughts on the fact you're going to have something, you're going to end up producing it.
Yeah.
And we had another lady on a course in her late 20s who was always told she was like her auntie. And her auntie had some particular illness. I can't remember the name of the particular illness right now, but had a particular illness. And she was always referred to as being like her auntie.
Yes.
So for years, ever since she was a child, her mother used to take her to the doctors to be checked for this rare disease. And she never had it. Then she was told last year that this disease really developed in her auntie at the age that she's at now.
Right.
Well, 6 months prior, she'd had a checkup, no illness. Now she's had a checkup, and she's got it. And the doctors can't figure out why, because the illness should not come on that quick. It should come on gradually. And she came on the course and told me the story and said, I know why I've got it now.
Oh.
So I said, do you know what to do now? She said, yeah, I've got to get shot of it.
So in actual fact, you're giving us 2 examples of the way the mind works. One in a very positive manner, and one in the most negative manner you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. Going back to how I got involved with this, it comes down to anger. I was actually doing a personal safety course once in London, and a girl came in who was 21 years old, who sat in the corner and would not look out the window. And it turned out that she has a phobia of pigeons.
Yeah.
Now, her phobia is so bad, if a pigeon flies past the window, she'll vomit. So her life consists of living in a room with no windows.
Good Lord.
So I asked her if she was undergoing therapy, and she'd actually been in therapy for 3.5 years. So she's had this illness or this problem for some time. So I asked her, I said, on a scale of 0 to 10, how bad were you when you first went to see a therapist? She said, it wasn't so bad then, I was about a 2 or a 3. I said, well, where are you now? She said, I'm off the scale. I can't leave the house. So I said, well, what's the next stage in your therapy? She said, well, the therapist said there's nothing more they can do for me. I've got to learn to live with it. And the words the therapist used was that she's resistant to therapy. So in other words, everything the therapist has tried hasn't worked. So put up with it. You're 21. You can have this problem till you die. So I got seriously angry. And I decided I'll work with her. So I worked with her for 4 hours. And within 4 hours, we were feeding pigeons in a park. Now, this is one of the things about society that I think we need to get a hold of by the scruff of the neck and rattle this stuff out of there. People are not only learning to be helpless, they're being told they're helpless. And there's no hope for them.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it this way. You've got a car.
I did.
Right. If you had a knocking on your engine,
Yeah.
and you took it to a mechanic and you said, look, I've got a bit of a knocking on my engine. I don't know anything about engines. Could you have a look at it? And I'll come back at the end of the day, and if you can fix it, I'll pay you. That would be quite a reasonable thing to expect.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right. So you come back at 5 o'clock, and your car's there, and your engine is on bits in the garage. And the mechanic stood there scratching his head. And you say, well, what's going on? He said, well, I found out what the tapping was. Yeah, I've taken your engine to bits, and it's definitely that bit there. And I've got the spare part. I can put it in there. But I've had a chat with your car, and your car's decided that it's resistant to being fixed. That's 400 quid, please. You'd pay him, wouldn't you? You get the analogy?
Yeah, I do.
Some therapists out there are imposing their way of thinking on clients that doesn't work, and then when it doesn't work, they tell the client that they're resistant. In other words, the therapist is a crap mechanic.
Yeah.
What quantum thinking does is it puts the ability back on the individual to take control of their lives.
So it's not being dependent then on visiting a therapist and, or a life coach or whatever. People, once they've actually grasped this, and I have to say, it took me a couple of days until it actually took hold on me. But I think I was looking for a more complicated structure to the whole thing. But it's not yet. The science is there and you can understand it. But it almost seems as though it's too simple. But I guess that's the whole point.
Well, yeah, it is simple. We have complex anatomies and we have complex brains, but we're not complex animals. We either like stuff or we don't. It's as simple as that. We're motivated, as Tony Robbins would say, by pain or pleasure. So if it's good, great. If it's not good, don't do it. And it's the way we think. The way we think is the basis of everything. Now, in terms of our complexity, we've got more neurons in the brain than there are stars and planets in all the known galaxies. We've got more cells in our body, 50 trillion cells in our body, than you could ever imagine, that are themselves made up of atoms and subatomic particles. And 99% of a subatomic particle is empty space, so therefore, by default, we are 99% empty space. But what makes those atoms and subatomic particles unique to us is the way that they vibrate. So, we have the same particles in us that are in a tree, in a desk, in a chair. But a wooden table, for example, will have a denser vibrational frequency than a human body. And different thoughts carry different vibrations. So a good thought would vibrate at a different frequency than a bad thought. Now, I'm not talking about new age stuff. You can measure this on MRI scanners, and we do it with athletes at national sports centres. But the fact is that every vibration we make, every thought we make, affects every cell in the body instantaneously. But we're habit-producing animals.
Yes.
So the more we do stuff, the more likely it is we're going to do it again.
So what the brain builds a bridge, it creates a connection in the brain?
Absolutely, it produces networks. Like a Lego set, come together and click together. The more you think in a certain way, the more you will attract more thinking, so that network becomes a dominant network. Now the thing is, if you want to explore that network to find out why you've got that particular problem, so you start thinking about the problem, you're just re-energizing the network and dragging more thoughts into it. Our brains are like huge transmission towers that send out certain frequencies. But if you send out a certain frequency, you will only attract back on that frequency.
Yes.
So if you and I had a walkie-talkie now, and you went over to the other side of this building, we would have to tune into the same frequency for me to hear you.
To communicate, yes.
Yeah. So I would transmit at that frequency and receive in that frequency. So if you think about this, if you've ever had something bad happen that's upset you, you'll probably find that 3 or 4 more negative thoughts will come in as to why that's happened and why else other things are going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You find some people have a run of good luck. They get lucky at one thing and 3 or 4 things happen that are good for them. So one dominant thought will attract other dominant thoughts. So if you look at a lot of people who are depressed in our society, I mean, they have this thing called stress, which is...
Well, I know that you actually believe that stress doesn't exist as such.
Not in the way they're promoting it, no, absolutely.
Explain that. I don't want to sidetrack you, just explain that, because I think this is something that people are going to be absolutely fascinated by.
Well, stress is a natural phenomenon. It's part of the fight and flight response. It's the thing that motivates us to do certain things, to move towards things we like and away from things we don't. Mm-hmm. It comes from, Dr. Cannon talked about this, years and years ago. He was the first person to talk about the primitive fight and flight response. And it's a primitive response that says that if that animal's going to, bite your head off, run away.
Yes.
And it's an inbuilt response that gives us instantaneous and very quick responses to threats, which are very important in a survival situation. Mm-hmm. Hans Sale was another eminent psychologist that first looked at the link between emotion and disease. And he found that certain negative emotions produce certain biological and physiological diseases in people. And he did studies with rats on this subject. Now, Hans Sale's work has been taken slightly out of context into terms of the way stress is talked about today. So you can go to the doctors and say, well, I'm feeling a bit stressed, and be signed off with it as though it's an illness. We've got people at work saying, that person is stressing me out. So stress is now a cause. Yes. And someone else will say, well, every time I think about that, I feel sick, or I get irritable bowel syndrome, or I come out in a rash.
Yes.
So now stress is a response. Well, it can't be an effect, a cause, and an illness. It can't be all three.
No.
But it's that broadly defined that anyone now can go off with this thing called stress. And because it can't be defined, people just accept it.
So let me ask you another question. Why will one person get stressed over a situation, but another person won't get stressed over the same situation?
Choice.
Choice.
If you don't want to be stressed, don't do it.
See, people are going to struggle with that concept, though, aren't they?
Well, of course they are, because if they're used to getting stressed by certain situations, it's easy to become stressed.
It's easy to become stressed because of the brain.
Yeah.
So are you saying then that if a person finds a situation uncomfortable, that can then become a stressor on them? And the brain says, oh yeah, I understand this. When I encounter this set of circumstances, I will behave in this manner. And the brain says, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, and it sets up a loop. It sets up a connection.
Well, it does. But it's being used out of context. The fight and flight response comes from a very primitive part of the brain called the amygdala. Mm. Now, when we first developed as human beings, this part of the brain was there. It's in most mammals. So if you came out of your cave, say, and there was a saber-toothed tiger, you wouldn't have to make a decision. That part of your brain would say, leg it, and would dump the blood to your legs so you could move within 1,000th of a second, which is quite an important timescale if you want to survive.
Yeah.
If you managed to go out hunting and you brought a dead animal into your cave, and then the likes of me turned up, because I thought, well, I'd rather nick Pete's meat than go out and hunt a wild animal, because a wild animal's more likely to kill me.
Yep.
You might see me doing that and think, I'm not having that. I'll kill him, because it's easier for me to kill Mark than go and hunt another wild animal.
Yeah.
So the fight response is geared. And the third aspect of this is the freeze response, which is something not necessarily talked about, but it's another aspect we can come to later on. When we lived in caves, where finding food and a place to sleep was important and life-threatening, this was a very, very important survival component. But over the last few 100,000 years, where we've become so-called civilized, it's not had a job to do. It's a redundant bit of the brain. Mm-hmm. But it's a very industrious brain. It doesn't like being redundant. It's always looking for something to do. So it needs a job. It won't go down the job centre. It's going to stay in your head until it finds something to do. So if you go to work one morning and someone's taken your car parking space, that's not really life-threatening. But if it makes you angry, then your emotional response to that acts as an alarm call to that brain, which says, there must be a saber-toothed tiger around here or someone to kill.
You understand.
Got it?
Yeah.
So the car parking spot becomes a survival issue. If you go into a pub and you go to the toilet and you come back and someone's sitting on your bar stool chatting up your girlfriend or your wife, if you think, I'm not happy with that, so your emotional response is a negative one, you get angry, then this brain gets an alarm call from the emotion, wakes up and says, oh, excellent, time to kill someone. And what's happening in society is people are actually applying this primitive response out of context to a survival situation.
Yes.
So you can get an argument with someone over a bar stool, ending up in someone being killed.
Oh, well, indeed, we've actually seen this over the last several months up in London, where people have been killed over very, very minor matters.
And the most important thing with this is, as well, is none of that physical behaviour can happen unless there's a thought process to it.
Yes.
Now, as you know, I'm not a very religious man, but I was recently listening to an audio program which has been produced by a guy called Nicky Gumbel, who runs the Alpha program for people who are interested in learning about Christianity but don't necessarily want to go to church. And he was quoting from some of the scriptures, and although I'm not religious, I found it quite interesting, because what he said was that apparently Jesus said that the thought of murder would not get you into the kingdom of heaven, because it's the thought that would, if it was continual, would lead to the act. So if you don't nip the thoughts in the bud, the thoughts build up, the neural networks grow, and eventually we murder someone, and they say it's not our fault.
Well, I mean, this whole idea about the thought, obviously, first. I mean, I've heard you talk a couple of times about everything in your life happens twice. You just explain that a little bit, because I think it works well with what you just discussed.
But you can't do it unless you think about it.
Yeah.
So when you go home tonight, you might think about having a bath. Then you'll run one. You might think about making a cup of tea. Then you'll have one. You might think about going to bed. Then you go to bed. We don't just work on autopilot. Now, if you don't think you're thinking about it, it's only because you become so good at thinking about it, it's become a habit, you just don't pay attention to your thinking. It's like, John Stedman.
Oh, well.
Probably one of the greatest martial artists that
without doubt.
Both know.
Without doubt.
Well, I was working with John one day, and he was demonstrating a technique. I said to me, tell me how you do that. He said, what do you mean? I said, just tell me how you think when you do that technique. He said, I'll just do it. I said, I know you just do it, but at some stage you must have thought about it. He said, no, you don't just think about it, you just do it. Now, he's correct. But I'll guarantee you, when he was learning that technique 40 or 50 years ago, he had to think about what he was doing.
Sure.
Now he's so proficient at it, it's a habit, and it's a good one. So John Stedman's technique is so proficient and so good, he doesn't have to think about it. It's an instantaneous response. So he has a network in his brain that is so good at what it does, it doesn't need any other stimulus apart from doing it. I know some people that are depressed. They just become very good at being depressed. And they've learned it. And they've now got good functional neural networks in their brain. So when they think about being depressed, they can become depressed. In fact, they're at a stage where they become depressed without even thinking about it, in the same way that Stedman does a technique.
Stedman does his technique.
Yeah.
So really with quantum thinking, it sounds to me as though virtually everything's up for grabs. From, whether someone's got a problem with stress or anger management, or they've got a block about earning money, or it just seems to be the applications of it. Once you grasp the principle, and it's something you can do yourself, it just seems to be limitless.
Well, in therapy, they have a thing called a magic wand question. They'll say, well, if I could wave a magic wand, so the miracle occurred tonight, and you woke up tomorrow morning with that miracle, how would your life be different? And it's quite a powerful question, because people then start thinking about what they want in life. So people in dysfunctional relationships or bad relationships would decide they want a better relationship. People with no money would decide they want money. And they'd start imaging and visualizing what it is they want. Well, up to the point they've been asked that question, they've probably always lived with the fact, as far as they believe it to be true, that they're not going to have a good relationship. They're not going to have money, which is why they don't have it. What quantum thinking is a solution to the miracle question, because it can provide the way to change. People walk around imagine someone walking around with two cakes.
Yep.
Two big flans, one in each hand. In your right hand, you got a custard pie. And in your left hand, you got a plate of dog poo.
Yeah.
What surprises me is people choose to hit themselves in the face with the stuff that stinks. Yeah. But then the bizarre thing is they say it's not their fault. Someone else made them do it. Someone else is moving my hand. Yeah. You can choose which hand to move. Yeah. How do you not get stressed? Don't do it.
It's a good illustration.
Yeah.
Mark, I know you're going to be running seminars up and down the length and breadth of the country. People can find you online. Your audio books are due for launch fairly soon, and of course, people are able to buy any one of the 3 or 4 books that you've written up until now. How excited are you about being able to bring this concept of quantum thinking to the public at large?
How excited?
Yeah.
Tremendously. I think the excitement lies not in the bringing it. The excitement lies in seeing people change.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things I loved about being in the forces was seeing people change through training. One of the things I loved about martial arts was seeing people come in with no confidence and then in a very short space of time have the confidence to do things they want. So it wasn't about the fighting element, it was about the changing people. In the military, you take a raw recruit, you'd have 6 weeks to train them. Martial arts, they might come there for a few months, so maybe 3-4 months, they're starting to develop confidence. This thing does it in 8 hours. And that's only because I've got them for 8 hours. Some of them change instantaneously once they get the concept, because I'm not teaching them what they don't know.
No, indeed.
They already know this stuff.
Aye. Well, that's true. In actual fact, when I attended your one-day seminar, there was lots of bits and pieces in there that I actually knew. But it was almost as though having somebody say, do you know, in actual fact, you're right about what you're thinking there, but let me just tell you, let me just explain to you why, by doing this and doing that you can change things. I mean, I just found it remarkable.
Well, I'm pleased for you.
I could detail the way it's changed my life over this last 6 months, but I don't think people will believe me. It's brought about colossal changes in me, and of course it's had a knock-on effect. My relationships have been better, and so I'm earning more money. My business life is better, so I thank you for that.
No, you're most welcome. Yeah.
Mark, as always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Is there anything else you feel, just to finish off with, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I think people should stop thinking about all the things that's wrong in their lives, because you can find enough evidence for that. If you start thinking about the things that you're grateful for in life, the things that you have and the things that you can potentially have, they're there too. We get used to thinking in a negative way. I mean, turn on the telly tonight. 90% of the news will be negative.
Sure.
Pick up the newspaper, 90% of the newspaper will be negative. And this is coming at us all the time. What I would say to people is, if you want to change your life and the lives of the people that you love, and the quality of your life, then change the way you think. It's that simple.
Mark, it's a pleasure as always to see you and talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
You're welcome, Pete. Thank you.